All right, so we have a new episode of Legends and Leaders, and today it's great to have Stuart here. So, Stuart, you're somebody who has really taken the fashion industry by storm. You created something entirely new with AllSaints. You were an early on design director at Reese. You now have a new business that's going to take all these different types of materials that may have been just went to landfills or burned, et cetera, and reuse them and create new types of pieces of fashion from them. So you've always tried to be at the forefront of this industry, and I'm excited to have you here and to get into your story.
Oh, thanks. Lovely to see you again. Thankfully, I'm not at the hospital now. Yesterday, I had an eye issue, but actually, you know what? The funny thing is they said everything's fine. So, anyway, you get to my age and bits start falling off. So,
I'm glad to hear you're doing well.
Good to know I'm doing well.
So, where did this kind of passion for fashion, for business come from? Like, how did this begin? Was it something you grew up with as a kid? Like, when did you first get into this?
So that's interesting because I've been talking a bit about this in the last year, and when we were developing the website, I was talking to a web developer, really cool guys, like in marketing and things like that. And I don't know why I have ADHD, and I'm Scottish, so you can end up talking away. I ended up telling him about my childhood in Dundee in Scotland. Because when I grew up in Dundee in Scotland, I was at home with a single mum with 4 kids. We had no money. My mother was a member of a church, and the church used to have some wealthier families, and they would send over boxes of hand-me-down clothes. So their children had grown out of things, and we would get a box of what I realise now is vintage clothing or pre-loved fashion. Back in those days, we didn't know anything like it. But I mean, to me, as a young boy, 8, 9 years old, 10, we would get this box. I would open it up. You would pick things out that would be, too big for me. And my mum, fortunately, was very good on a sewing machine, and I would tell her the things I liked. I would style up like a look, pick bits out and put it together, and ask her if she could take it in or cut the sleeves off or do something interesting with it. So, I mean, I was obsessed with clothes from the minute that I heard David Bowie on my auntie's stereo. I remember running over to it and listening to the words and thinking, wow, this just sounds magical. I think it was Starman, but I'm not. I don't even remember now. It might have been Space Oddity, but I remember then thinking, I want to know who this guy is. So I was sitting and in England in those days, the only thing we had was Top of the Pops, which was a Thursday evening TV program that had the latest pop stars on it, and David Bowie was on there. And I remember watching him thinking, wow, this guy is so cool. And then thinking, I want to be cool. I want to get into fashion, and so the box would arrive. I would pull the stuff out. I'd say to my mum, "I'll cut the sleeves off," or and then she taught me to sew, things like that. And I just became obsessed with music and fashion, and that was it. From that point on, I was hooked. So it's kind of like interesting because it wasn't like as if, I mean, the world was a different place. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have designers. Nobody knew anything about that. And I remember my mother married my stepfather. We moved to London when I was 11. I went to an all-boys grammar school where you had to wear a school uniform. And I started styling the school uniform. I wore a sweatshirt under my blazer instead of the school V-neck jumper with the tie and all that. Because sweatshirts weren't very popular, or they weren't, nobody really knew what they were. The teacher, the master, he didn't really know what it was. And I remember going to Selfridges once, and they had a machine there that you could get like velour letters, and you could write what you wanted. And there was a kid at my school that used to call himself the Royal Moi, like he was royal or whatever. And I kind of thought that was funny. So I printed him a sweatshirt with the Royal Moi. And I had the Royal Moi written on one, and I had it on the back, and I wore it to school. And they used to make me sit at the front because I talked too much. And so I took the blazer off, and everyone behind me saw the Royal Moi written on the back of the sweatshirt, and everybody's laughing. And the master didn't know, the teacher didn't know what was going on. And so I kind of, it was from a very young age. I was always interested in. You had a specific school trouser you had to wear. I would go and buy a pleated Bowie pant sort of thing, and wear that and get away with it. And then when I got to about 16, I finished school and I applied to go to an art foundation course. And the day that I was going to go, I'd left home. I'd had my nose pierced. I'd bleached my hair blonde, and I grew it long. Um, first year out of school over the summer. I woke up that morning about 6 in the morning, and I thought, my roots had come through, and I dyed my hair like I had a burgundy crazy color, and I dyed it burgundy. But I put it on there, and I waited an hour, and then I washed it out, my God, the hair was bright fuchsia pink, like really. I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? So I thought, I'm not going to. There's no way I can't go to school like this. But I didn't have a hat. I thought I just got to go. So I got some Brill cream, and because they didn't have hair gel or hair products back then, nobody really made them. The only thing you could get was this really shitty gel from Boots the Chemist called Country Born. So I mixed that with Brill cream, and I slicked my hair back. So I had like fuchsia pink hair, and I had a boiler suit on, like a flight suit, and a biker jacket, and a studded belt, and a pair of biker boots, and I went off to college, and I went to the Art Foundation course, and that was fine. But I was really nervous. I mean, I was like 16 years old. I was like thinking, oh my God, everyone's looking at me. I'm an idiot. What the hell have I done? God, it's so embarrassing. And people were looking at me, but it was art school, so they were sort of fine. Then I went into, I'd chosen to do maths and physics A levels because I wanted to be, at that point, I thought, I'm creative. What am I going to do? I'll be an architect. The school said, well, you need A levels in art, physics and maths. So I went into these classes, and I don't know how I managed to get through my first exams, but the A levels were another world. It was all, equations. I couldn't work out what the hell was. I was thinking, wow, this is a huge mistake. And I went to the canteen for lunch, and I sat down and had a tray of food. I was just sitting there thinking, what am I going to do? This is a disaster. And these kids came over and said, "Hey, man, hey, dude, well, hello, mate." Well, like, what are you? What band are you in? And I said, I'm not in a band. And they're like, you must be. You look like a rock god. I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm not in a band. And then some other kid comes over, looks like Robert Smith from The Cure, hair all like a bit of makeup on. So, hey man, can I sit with you? What band are you in? I'm not in a band. And they go, you should join my band. You're really cool. You could be the singer and all this sort of stuff. And then a girl came over, and she's like, she looked like the lead singer of the Thompson Twins. Her hair was all shaved at the side. She had like a Mohican mohawk. She was like, so what band are you in? I'm not in a band. I was kind of enjoying this by then. She's like, well, you must be on the fashion course. And I was like, I had no idea what she was talking about. So we all walked up to the fashion course, and I walked into this room, and there was sewing machines and mannequins and pattern cutters and all this sort of get loads of girls. I was like, wow, I want to be in this class, not the math and the physics. So I went straight up to the tutor and said, hey, I really want to. I need to be in this class. And she's like, well, you're too late. You need to come back next year. You should have applied before. And the girl who with the mohawk, she was on the. She went, Miss, you got to look at this kid. He was born to be here. You need him in here. She went, she goes, can you sew? And I went, yeah. And she's like, can you? I went, yeah. She went, really? I'm like, yeah. She went, okay. So she pulled out this bit of fabric and a little a set that had 4 stages of making like a blazer pocket. She said, if you can make a pocket by the end of the day, I'll consider it. So I went away and made that pocket in like 10 minutes and brought it back to her. And she was like, wow, you're miles ahead of everyone else. You can start tomorrow. So that's how I got in the fashion business.
Yeah, it's quite a story so far. So, so basically, where did this idea for like All Saints come from? Was that so you're working as a design director, where you kind of decided to build your own thing? Like, why decide to build your own thing? Why kind of come up with this idea for All Saints, and what niche in the market were you seeing then?
So when I was, so after that college thing, I did a couple of years there, and then I went and did a degree in fashion. And in the second year of the degree, I won the Smirnoff Fashion Awards. It was at the Royal Albert Hall. It was televised. I had also won a Paul Smith Mont Blanc competition. Paul Smith offered me a job over the summer, like an internship. But this guy Reese rang me 14 times, rang the college to say, the university, to say, you know, he wanted to meet me. So the college made me go there. So I went down to meet him, and he offered me £500 and a trip to Italy. And I ended up going to Italy with him. I remember on the plane he asked me, "So what's the big look for next winter?" And I was like, "They don't teach you anything like that at college." So I just thought about one of the external tutors that came in. He used to wear like a hoodie with a zip through. Back in those days, people in England didn't know what a hoodie was. They weren't for sale. No one knew what they were. So I didn't know what it was. I just said it's like a cardigan that has a zip, and it has like a hood, and it has like ribs on the sleeves, and it has like little pockets like a kangaroo. And then I was describing the rest of his outfit. I said he's trousers with a little zip in the side, and like a Mac with a stand up collar and a tab, and maybe sort of like slant pockets, or it could be patched pockets with a flap, and then like monkey boots, and then like a like a baseball cap, but with like a long peak, kind of curved, and then with like mesh on the back, and then like a number on the front or something. I was describing a New York, Yankees cap sort of thing, but I didn't know what it was. And we arrived in Florence, and David Reese went up to his hotel room, and I'm wandering around in the street, in the courtyard, thinking, well, at least I got a trip to Italy out of it, because I just thought, I'm clueless. The guy's going to have it. He's going to know that I don't know what I'm talking about. So we came down and we went round the shops, and the Antwerp Six had just launched with Martin Margiela and Dries Van Noten and all, and there was Gaultier, and all they had in the shops in Florence, they had the new season's collection, and it was all cardigans with hoods, and Macs with little tab collars, and monkey boots, and trousers with zips. And David was like, "What? This boy's a genius. He knows that." He rang the office in London, going, "The boy's a genius," buying bottles of champagne, all this sort of stuff. So, and I went to see Paul Smith, and Paul Smith refused to pay me anything, but David was willing to pay me £50 a day, which back then was like, equivalent of £200, £300 a day. So, for me, a young kid, I was like, wow, yeah, I'm going to do that. So I ended up working with him for about 8, 7, 8, 9 years, and I set up their own label. When I first joined, it was a multi-brand store. They were in trouble, so I started working with factories, and I said we can design all of it ourselves, and I'll design everything. I'll design knitwear and shirts and suits and Macs and caps and socks and ties and cufflinks and shoes and whatever you want. And we started, and then I said, we should go out to Hong Kong. We can make stuff over there. He was like, no, there's no way. You need to be a big, huge company. And I said, well, we went to Hong Kong, and I put a collection together, and the factories loved it, and we brought it back to London. And I said, we should do Paris Fashion Week, and we should show this. And David was like, there used to be shows in Paris called SEM and the Nouvelle Espace, where all the designers would show. And he was like, that's for real designers. And I'm like, I am a real designer. And he actually agreed to do it, and we did it, and we sold it to Barney's New York and Saks Fifth Avenue and Selfridges and Harvey Nichols and Harrods and Seibu in Hong Kong. We sold it all over the world. So after a couple of years of that, I used to always still get this thing like, that's real designers and all. And David he was a lovely guy, but he was a very hard work and very opinionated and really. I used to argue a lot with him about. He used to call a lot of what I did cheap disco rubbish because he didn't understand it. He was like an older gentleman in a suit and a tie, and I was doing like bomber jackets with a double zip and like a big rib collar or something kind of cool. And then they would arrive in the shop and they would be the best sellers. And then he would say, well, oh, look at this. I designed this new. And I was like, anyway, after a while, I had some of the factories from Hong Kong came to see me and they said, listen, we want to work with you. We think you're great. We're doing like 10 million a year in and we'd like you to be the agent. We're going to give you 10%. And I was like, wow, if you've got that much money, why don't we do my own label? Why don't we set up our own label? And I'd written it all down. I'd bought a vintage car when I was 20 in Prescott in Arizona. It was a Volvo P1800, which is a really beautiful classic car. Looks a bit like a James Bond. Aston Martin DB5 crossed with a Carman gear, and it's got little wings on it. And it was actually the car that Roger Moore, who became James Bond after Sean Connery, he drove it in The Saint, which was a TV series in the 60s. It was very cool. So my initials are ST, like Simon Templar, who was the James Bond character. And when I drove that car to LA on New Year's Eve in 1989 and shipped it back to London, and I used to drive it around. And everybody all over London every day, and everybody used to call me the Saint. And so when I had to come up with a brand name, because it was going to be 50% owned by a Chinese manufacturing company, Hong Kong-based manufacturer, I wanted a pseudonym for me. So I thought the Saint or Saint and then I was on All Saints Road in Notting Hill, which is a really cool street where there used to be a lot of Rastafarians and Trustafarians. There was like a mix, a really good melting pot of like, um, Caribbean culture and young, affluent British. There was like a bit of what do they call it? Gentrification going on there, and it was a very cool area, really great music, and a bit like I don't know Brooklyn is, or a bit like areas of LA or whatever in America, like a slightly cooler, hip neighborhood. And I decided to call the brand All Saints because it slips off the tongue. So I handed in my notice at Reese. He was furious, and David Reese, and I was kind of like, at that time, I don't know why, I had the balls to go out and do it. And I remember years later meeting the guy that owned Club Monaco. The day that I launched it, or the day that I decided to leave, and I had a confirmation from the Chinese people. The guy from Club Monaco in Canada rang me up and said, because I'd been to see him, he offered me a job, and I said, I don't really want to move to Canada. I want to move to New York, and I think Club Monaco should be based in New York. We should get a shop there and have like the office above it, and I'll design everything, and I'll design, and we'll and he rang me that day and said, hey, Stuart, I just want to confirm that we're going to offer you the job, and we found a unit in New York, and it's got this design studio. And I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? So I told him about All Saints, and I told him about the Chinese guy, and he went, you know what a cool guy. He said, you know what? I once launched my own brand. He said, so this is going to kill me because it's taken me 6 months to make my mind up, and I've agreed it with the board, and we're going to give you the money you want and set up he said, but I think you should go and do your own brand. He said, because you know what? If it doesn't work out, you can come back and I'll give you a job. So, what a kind, cool guy. His name was Joe Mimran. I met him in Premier Vision in Paris about 10 years later. And by that time, All Saints was killing it. And I was like, Joe, oh, whoa, mate. And we had a big hug. And I'm like, oh, thank you so much. He said, I knew you could do it. I knew you could do it, man. So yeah, that's how I that's how I started All Saints. That's how I got going. So yeah.
So you're building this brand now. Like, what were kind of like some of the things that you really wanted to accomplish with it? I mean, I know you sold it at a certain point and you felt like, that was kind of the end of that. But before that point, like, what was like your big overarching goal with All Saints, with the kind of fashion you were trying to create?
Well, sorry, pardon me. So I, at that time, my greatest inspiration was my 15-year-old self. So I used to look back at what I used to do. I used to take vintage flying suits and I would, cut the sleeves off them, or I would, get a vintage biker jacket and I would wash it so that because when you get them, sometimes they're a bit mucky. So I would just put it in the washing machine and then you come out and it's kind of crumpled, and I used to like that. So I started doing all that for All Saints, and I was garment dyeing things as well. I used to do that a lot. When I was a kid, you never had fashion shops, so we used to go to Army and Navy stores and buy vintage military pieces and cut the sleeves off and sew a camo sleeve onto a plain. And I'd buy a shirt like this and a camo jacket and swap the sleeves, or cut the back off it or get a leather jacket and put the camo sleeves on. And so I ended up just taking vintage pieces that I'd customized and taking them to the factory, and the factory would make me counter samples, and we would order. I always really, really fancied a leather shirt, like a bit rock and roll. So I did a leather shirt back in those days, and we ordered 100. I remember my partner at that time saying to me, like, who's going to buy that? And I'm like, I would. I don't, everyone they think it's cruelty. So we had 100 turn up, and they sold out in one day. And then
Huh.
I had about 6, 8, 10 shops by then, and every shop rang me up and go, "Oh mate," they're pulling it out of the bag. "This is the most great. I love it. I want one." And I'm like, "No, you, the manager." I'm like, "You can't have one. Put them out on the shop floor and see how it goes." And then they'd ring back at 5 o'clock and say, "Mate, we've sold all of them. We've sold 10." I'm like, "How did you possibly?" He said, "Everyone, we put it in the window, and then there was a queue at the till." So then we ordered 500 of that shirt, and then the 500 would turn up, and they would sell out in a weekend. And then we'd order But it wasn't just that shirt. Then there was a biker jacket, there was a pea coat, there was, just at that point, it was almost as if whatever I did, sold out, and it became quite stressful. Because when I'd started out just designing clothes and having quite a nice life, and then all of a sudden I was managing a business with £15 million turnover, and then unfortunately this was after the Gulf War. There was some bombs went off in London. 4 people blew themselves up in one day on a tube packed with people, and I thought actually some of my staff were on one of the trains because it was near my head office, and I sort of thought, God, I'm going to have to ring because they didn't turn up. Fortunately, they were stuck on the tube on a previous on a later train, so they all turned up. But I just remember at that time thinking everything was becoming quite serious and quite nerve wracking, and somebody came along and offered to buy into the brand to take away some of that anxiety, and I agreed to sell them part of the company, and then they bought out my partner, and they had majority share, and then they put a £20 million loan on the table, and they demanded that I sign it, and I really didn't want to be liable for £20 million. I didn't really trust them. I didn't know what they were going to do with it. They didn't have a business plan or anything. So in the end, I tried to buy them out. They said it wasn't enough money. So then I said, well, then you're going to have to buy me out. So they made me an offer, and to be honest, I looked at it and thought I can walk away now, and I won't have any of this anxiety. I did put a clause in the contract, and they agreed to it, that I would get £1 per garment for the rest of my life. Um, and at the very last minute, they pulled that from the deal. So that was a shame because nowadays it's a $470 million business or whatever. But so I. that would have been a great deal. But anyway, it didn't happen. So yeah, at that point, I didn't want to sell it, but sometimes in life, as an entrepreneur, it's all about timing. You know, if the time's right. I mean, the guys that bought it from me, they borrowed $198 million, pounds, sorry, and then they spent it within 10 years, and then they were on the verge of bankruptcy, and someone came along, a big financier came along, and he bought them out at the last minute, and they took on that debt, so they still owe 198 million. So you know what? Sometimes in life, you know, it's good to know when to hand your. It's like a card game or whatever. Sometimes it's good to know when to move on. So I moved on.
So then why did you decide to get back into it and start another brand?
Well, I did another brand after that. I did another brand called Bolongaro Trevor, and because by that time I'd become quite famous for dressing rock bands, and I was then getting phone calls from all sorts of bands and artists. You know, from American bands like Destiny's Child and Bush and um, Gwen Stefani and then English bands like Depeche Mode and the Kings of Leon. They were huge in England, but when I discovered them when they first came, and I dressed them for their first tour in England, and they were huge in England. I don't think that they were as big in America. They definitely weren't in the beginning anyway. And then I got phone calls, and I was from the Who, and the guy Roger Daltrey, the lead singer, rang me up. He's like, "Hello, mate, how are you? I've got something to you." It's Roger, and I for some reason I knew it was Roger Daltrey from the Who, and he went, "I've got something huge. I can't tell you what it is," and I'm like, uh, "Go on then. What is it?" He goes, "It's the Super Bowl," and I was like, "Wow!" I've been laughing because he's like, "I can't tell you what it is, NDNA and all that, you know." What is it? The Super and I dressed them for the Super Bowl, and then I get a phone call a couple of years later, going, "Hello, mate, it's Roger again. Hey, I've got something even bigger." I said, "What is it?" He goes, "I can't tell you. You know, it's some sign of secrecy." I goes, "What is it?" He goes, "It's the Olympics and all that." And he was closing the Olympics in 2012. So, and I dressed them for that. So I kind of got back into it, and then about 10 years down the line, I decided I had an offer, and I sold that business as well. Um, and yeah, and then I had a kind of couple of years off, and I think yeah, it kind of like the 10-year itch. I think 10 years at Reese, 10 years at AllSaints, 10 years at Bolongaro Trevor, and then I just had a couple of years, but then I started working with uh, young brands that came to me for advice, and a lot of them were. I ended up getting really interested in brands that had a startup brands that had a positive social or environmental impact. And talking to these kids, they had a real unbelievable passion for the planet and what's going wrong in the world and all the things that and none of it was kind of all Greta Thunberg where, you know, woe is me, the planet's gonna, you know, we're all gonna die. It was kind of these guys were having fun and talking about we need to do something now. And so that was in the back of my mind. I started kind of working on that about 2 years ago. In the meanwhile, I've got this collection of vintage pieces, and I started putting them together, and I started adding, like, collecting patches and badges and sewing them on and printing. I came up with a logo. I think, oh yeah, I've got the logo. The logo's like my initials, ST, and I was trying to register ST as a brand and as a website, but you couldn't. You can't do st.com. So I had to do stuarttrevor.com. So then I had like the label made that had that ST on the front and it had the Stuart Trevor on the back. And the first labels that I had were, you know, branded like with the ST, but everybody just said, you know, mate, I just want Stuart Trevor. So I started putting that in the back of the garment, um, and everyone loved it, and so kind of started putting that together and sort of announced it on social media just about 3 months ago. And I have a really cool vintage loft in Shoreditch, Hoxton, in East London, and I had tenants in it, and they moved out, so I kind of moved in and I laid everything out, and I hung it all up on chains, and I had some friends come around, and they went, "My God, Stu, this is amazing! You need to get a website together. You need to launch this as a brand." Um, and one of these guys, a good friend of mine who I'd met a couple of years earlier, he just sold a healthy fast food chain. He did very well out of that. He came in to look at it, and he was looking at doing some new type of healthy fast food or healthy food option, and with a fashion twist. And I always thought that, I would like to do fashion, my own brand, but then I could always do, because years ago with AllSaints, I did a collaboration with a vodka brand, and I had vodka bottles, and I made a label on it, and the label was a skull made out of crosses, and I did another label that was a cross made out of skulls, and I just put them on this vodka bottle, and then I realized you have to have a license to sell vodka. So I just put them in the shop with a sign that said anyone spending £500 can get a free bottle of All Saints vodka, and we sold out of 200 bottles in about 2 weeks in the run up to Christmas. Of course, everybody wanted to have a party, invite their friends back after party, and go, "Look what I've got, an All Saints vodka bottle." That's so. I was, anyway. So I just announced this on social media about 2 months ago, and I just said, "Oh, I'm going to have a launch party." I had some DJs from New York called the Illustrious Blacks. They're two outrageously camp black guys, a little bit like a cross between Daft Punk and RuPaul. They kind of do voguing and all that when they're DJing and singing on a mic and all that. And they wanted to have a London Fashion Week party. So I said, let's do a party, and spoke to drinks people, and then I put it on social media, and I put it on LinkedIn, and LinkedIn I had 130,000 impressions and 600 likes and comments, and my Instagram had like 300 likes and 200 comments, and I was getting all these messages. And so then we set up an email address, info@stuarttrevor.com, and we said RSVP to this, and the next minute we had like 400 RSVPs, and on the day of the party 700 people turned up. They were all queuing up outside. We had drinks and canapes, and we had models turn up, and the models chose outfits, and we photographed them, and people could see what it was like being in a photographic studio or in a design studio, and it just went viral. Everybody was kind of going ballistic. It was a really fun event, but it kind of made me think, wow, we really need to get our act together, because this is, and everybody loved the message. And the message is that there is far too much clothing in the world, because people used to ask me again and again and again, will you do another brand? I'm kind of bored of All Saints. It's like this huge company now. It's a big corporation. And I kind of, all Reese is kind of boring. It's like office wear, why don't you do another brand? And I was like, the last thing the world needs is another clothing brand. But what about a clothing brand that doesn't produce any clothes? And they were like, what do you mean? I'm like, there's so much clothes already. We could just take existing pieces and upcycle them and customize them and make them cool. And so that's kind of what I set about doing. And I've done it, and I've launched it, and everybody's kind of gone wild. I've got a load of it here if you want to have a look. Do you want to, shall I?
For sure.
I'll take the camera around and just give you a little tour. I don't know whether I can turn this around.
I'm not sure you can.
No, I can't. Right, I'll just turn it around and show you. So this is
Oh,
some
wow.
pieces that I made, and I had a girl hand sew this with a little old 1920s Singer sewing machine it's like a little chain stitch, and then I took like Hawaiian shirts and I cut them up and cut them in two, and I joined them together, and created something really cool looking. And then I took like military pieces, and I collected Vietnam War era patches, and I just added my branding to them, and then I just printed the back and all this sort of stuff. So we ended up with a whole range of things. I have like really cool vintage. These are proper original Hawaiian shirts. And then I made a little label that goes on every garment, like zigzag stitched in. It's like I found it on a 1920s tailoring piece from LA, and I had them made with my name on it. So I sign it and I date it and I write the name, the model. It was going to be the model of the garment, but it's now anyone who buys it. We call them the model. So you would be model. This would be Brian if you bought it, and it's a one-off piece. So it's lot one of one, and it's a size large, but it's co-branded Stuart Trevor and Hukana brand made in Hawaii, and it's an original one-off piece. So it's kind of so I'll take you through to my design studio. Here's some pieces like these are World War II green jackets, like military. This is a Royal Navy officer's dress piece that they would wear. So we just kind of like customized it. That's a Royal Navy dress tunic. I mean, like these are kind of you know ex military pieces, but then we did. Oh, and then we have like guards jackets that we've customized. We've added like the little brand too, and then we just took some of it is old. This is old Junior Watanabe, like a Indian hand knitted sweater, and then these are like a 1950s Korean War parka, and I collected these varsity patches for years, and then added them to the parka. It has the removable liner, and then I added some. This is a British Royal Navy electronic warfare patch. So that's like a what is it called, a torpedo, and that's a missile sort of thing. But these are like metal, hand embroidered metal sort of patches. These are like Gillette body warmer, and I just added all the patches onto them. And this is like a flight suit. And then I did a collaboration with an artist who moved to England. He's an American kid from the middle of nowhere in Ohio, and he moved to Margate, and he was hanging out with all these bands. And he rang up his mum in the middle of America because he's hanging out with these bands, and they're all rolling up the little cigarettes and they're all having a little drink, and he's like, "Mum, I'm hanging out with cats who smoke," and I thought that was really cool, so I got him to do. He did cats who smoke, but then I was thinking I don't really like smoking. I mean, actually, I don't mind cats who smoke though, but we kind of changed it to cats who care. So because we were doing kind of military pieces, so I don't obviously glorify war in any way. It's just that there's so much of this clothing around, and it's so well made and so cool. But if you just add pieces like this, I when I was about 18, I met a guy in an airport in Milan. His name was Albert Watson. He's one of the world's greatest photographers. He had just been doing a shoot for Giorgio Armani in the middle of America, and he was wearing a Levi's trucker jacket with "Jesus loves you" written on the back. And I went over to him and I asked him, like, "Where did you get that?" And he said, "Oh, I found it in a thrift store in the middle of America." I couldn't believe it. It was like a hidden treasure, that gave me the idea that I want to everything that I ever do, I want it to be like hidden treasure. So that's why, customizing these things and adding these bits. And so this is another military piece that I added, like this is hand embroidery and hand beading. So there's like, this is a vintage curling cardigan. This is from the 1960s. And then I got these Vietnam War era shirts that John Lennon used to wear. Some of them were with holes in them and things like this. So I cut the back off them. This one had a huge rip down the back. So I cut the back off them and I replaced it with some dead stock fabric. So this is kind of like, this is all hand beaded. on a net fabric, and the girls have gone mental for it. This is another one, similar sort of thing, and on a camo, and yeah, kind of that's it. And then we got hoodies, and we're making these from 100% GOTS certified organic cotton, and we came up with the logo, we reprinted it, and yeah, just trying to make something commercial. So this is like an old 1930s boating blazer. This is a 1980s German military leather bomber jacket sort of thing. So, and that's kind of, if you look around the place, a lot of the pieces, these are very unique, like one-off pieces that I've been collecting over the years. That's a bit of taxidermy there that I've had for years. And then we're just doing bits and bobs and having fun and putting a collection together, and yeah, hopefully people. Well, so far we've just launched it last week, and we've sold about 10 items so far, but that was like a soft launch, so we haven't really marketed it. We haven't really put any money into marketing. These are just fans of mine, I suppose, or people that people that are into the idea that because we're not going to stop people buying clothes, are we? Because everybody likes to treat themselves, but I think Vivian Westwood had it right when she said buy less and buy better. And so that's what we want to do. I mean, I'm happy if people going out and start clearing out their wardrobe and cutting the sleeves off things and reinventing their own wardrobe. And obviously, I'd love it if they came and bought things from us as well, because we have bills to pay. But I think that will happen too. I mean, I just think, as far as I'm concerned, or if I can inspire, kids to stop buying cheap, fast fashion made out of polyester that ends up in landfill, then great, because it's killing our planet. And I think we've only got one planet. I think in 50 years' time, I watched a documentary last night called Planet Earth 3 with David Attenborough. And at the end of the program, there's a little island just off the coast of Australia, and there's a green turtle, and it's the only breeding ground, but the island is sinking. The water levels are rising because the polar ice caps are melting. They're not sure whether in 50 years' time that island's going to exist, that those turtles are going to exist, unless governments do something about it and corporations do something about it. These huge corporations, they're chasing huge billion-dollar turnovers. A lot of them are losing money. What's the point? What's the point of, they're already doing 10 billion turnover. What's the point of chasing 11 billion when they're actually losing money? If you look at Nike's share price, they went last couple of months ago, they dropped dramatically because it becomes apparent that they overproduced probably by 1 billion pieces. It's absolutely horrendous, and we need to do something about it.
Yeah, well, look, Stuart, I think that's all the questions that I had, and you shared a lot. And you really have an interesting story, and I think this new brand that you're trying to create here it serves a great purpose. I mean, there's nothing really in the category that I've seen that takes advantage of all these different types of pieces of clothing that can be given a second life, that can be used and can be experimented with, and you can create so many wonderful things with that. So I'm excited to see how your brand goes, and to keep in touch, and appreciate you coming on.
Great, thank you very much. And yeah, if I can get a message out there, it is, as Vivian Westwood said, buy less, buy better. Maybe go into your wardrobe, take pieces out, upcycle it, or go online to stuarttrevor.com and buy something from me. That would be nice.